A big part of our vocabulary and the material that we're using when we're improvising is linked to scales. And it is of course also really common to practice scales on a daily basis if you're playing jazz or if you're trying to learn how to play jazz. And you will also, while you're trying to learn how to play jazz, be confronted with the fact that you have to learn some new scales and get them into your playing, find ways to really get them into your system and find them on your instrument and be able to use them when you're playing music. In this video, I want to talk about how you go about that. What do you need to learn? How do you structure that in a nice way? How do you make sure that what you're practicing is actually helping you achieve those goals and that you're not wasting your time doing stuff that doesn't really make any sense? My name is Larsen. If you want to learn more about jazz guitar and use that to make music, then subscribe to my channel. If you want to make sure not to miss anything, then click the little bell notification icon next to the subscribe button. The best way to start when you're learning a new scale is probably just to learn one single position of that scale. Because if you're learning one position, then you have all the notes in the scale. You have sort of a nice visual representation that's going to help you when you're just getting used to playing the scale. And it can be easier to remember that instead of just the note names or any other thing. And you can play it and get it into your ears. And already when you know one position, you can start working on making some music with the notes in that position. Of course, when you're working with positions, you can also gradually expand this and then add other positions one by one, and in that way finally cover the entire neck with the scale, which is of course something you want to do, because when you're improvising, then you want to have the freedom to just move around the neck using material from that scale. When you start practicing a scale in a single position, then start by just trying to play it in time, probably with a metronome, and then really try to listen to the notes that you're playing. Try to also connect the notes well, so that make sure you don't have any unwanted gaps in there, because you want to eliminate any sort of technical problems that you might have, especially because if you try to play the scale faster later, then those technical problems are going to explode and it's not going to sound that nice. So you want to keep it really under control with a nice strong tone, and also really playing legato, so in the sense that you're really connecting the notes and able to move smoothly from one note to the next. And once you know the scale and positions, then you can start working on connecting the positions, which is of course something that you need to be able to do when you're improvising. When you're playing and when you're actually trying to make music, you don't want to be thinking about scale positions, you just want to think about the music. And of course the amount of positions that we have is also going to vary depending on what kind of system you're using for your scale positions. I think the most common variations on this are having either 7 or 5 positions for each scale. So one thing that really makes sense to start working on is different ways of moving not from the low strings to the high strings and back in one position, but maybe start working on playing from the lowest note on the instrument to the highest note, or maybe to work on just finding that scale on one string and in that way connect the different positions. And there are of course a ton of different exercises you can do for this, but the basic ones would just be to play the scale on one string or play the scale from the lowest note to the highest note on the instrument. When you're improvising with a scale, then you're using it to make up melodies over some sort of context. And usually that's going to be some sort of chord progression, or and more specifically just one chord. It's important that you're aware of what the notes are in the scale and how they fit and how they relate to that chord context. So you want to know what notes are in the scale. And there are a few ways you can think about this. And actually you kind of need it all to sort of come together. I think you want to know really just what notes are in there. I play with a lot of different instruments and we tend to mostly communicate with the note names, not so much the intervals. At the same time, it's also useful to know the intervals, because if you know the intervals, you have a little bit of a better description of how it sounds, and that's going to help you understand sort of the effect of a note over a chord. So for my G major scale here, you want to know that the notes are G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp and G. But you also want to know sort of the construction of the scale, so that we have a whole step from G to A, again another whole step up to B, and then a half step. This kind of information is important as well. And you also want to be able to relate sort of any note in the scale to any other note in the scale. So if I'm using the G major scale over an A minor chord, then I want to know that the G is actually a flat 7 over that A minor chord, so I know what that note sounds like against the root. It's really about just checking out what is available in the scale. This is not really about trying to think about every interval against a root note. I think it's much more about really looking at the scale and then trying to construct some of the things that are in there and understand what they sound like. So that means that you want to take the scale, you want to explore what are the triads in there, what are the seventh chords, and also eventually you want to just really look at, if I take this scale and I make any note the root, then what kind of chord am I getting? What are the extensions? What is that going to sound like? This is of course also a question of ear training, but it is really so that you start having an idea about what a flat 9 sounds like, or maybe what a sharp 11 sounds like. And those are the things that you want to have available and have in your ears once you start using it, because then you know that when you're using this scale against this chord, then it's going to sound like a certain set of notes, and you can make melodies with it because you know what it sounds like as well. The reason that I can keep on publishing videos every week is that there is a community of people over on Patreon that are supporting the channel. I'm very grateful for their support, and it's because of them that I can keep on making all these jazz guitar and music theory videos. If you want to help me keep making videos, then check out my Patreon page, and if you join us over on Patreon, I can also give you something in return for your support. Until now, I've mostly been talking about exercises and things that you have to sit down and figure out for each of these scales. But of course, the goal with all this is that you can use the scale to make music. And there are really two things you want to keep in mind when you're trying to make music with a scale. I think one thing is that you just want to make music with a scale. I think with anything you're practicing in terms of trying to make music, if you're not practicing actually making music with it, then you're probably not going to get there. So if you're trying to work on playing the G major scale over a C major 7 chord, then maybe you also really want to spend some time just listening to that C major 7 chord, maybe make a recording of yourself playing that chord, or find a backing track, and then try to improvise some lines over that using that G major scale, and just see what you can come up with and see what sounds nice and develop vocabulary through actually playing the vocabulary. Another thing that you want to do, which is a little bit more coming from the theory and the exercises that I just talked about, would be to also explore, well, what is possible. This is really about what kind of music do you play, but if you're playing a G major scale over a C major 7 chord, then you probably want to be able to play a C major 7 arpeggio. So you want to practice that C major 7 arpeggio. So that means that it makes sense to also really practice the diatonic arpeggios, because that's what you want to use when you're improvising. So for the scale position, that means that you want to do exercises like this. But of course, you don't only want to do the exercises, you also want to figure out, and here you can use the theory again, which of these arpeggios might sound good on your C major 7 chord, and then maybe spend some time practicing using those. So not only being able to play them, but also being able to actually make music with them. A good example of this would be that if you're playing a C major 7 in G major, then probably that sharp 11 is important. So maybe it makes sense that you want to practice using the diatonic triads. And one diatonic triad especially that's useful could be the one from D, so a D major triad. And that means that you want to maybe see if you can find some ways to make some nice melodies over a C major 7, sharp 11, and then using that D major triad. So and those kind of sounds is something that you are only going to find if you know how to play those triads, and if you know how to play the scale, and then that you practice making melodies and actually making music with that material. If you want to have a better understanding of the fretboard and look at some different ways of gaining a good fretboard overview, then check out some of the videos in this playlist where I talk about how I think about the fretboard and also discuss some of the different scale position systems that are very common out there. If you want to learn more about jazz guitar and this is the first time you see one of my videos, then subscribe to my channel. If you want to help me keep making videos, then check out my Patreon page. That's about it for this time. Thank you for watching, and until next time.